Greetings from the Jazz Cloud. I'm Richie Zellon, and I want to welcome you to the Jazz Guitar channel, where today I bring you the first in a two-part series on walking bass lines that swing. You know, there are several videos on this subject on the internet. Some are good and some not so good. Today, at the request of several students, I give you my personal take on the subject. And in this first part, we are going to use a major chord progression as the vehicle to learn the concept. In a future second part, I will cover minor chord progressions. For this lesson, I will be using the 1-6-2-5 progression, which is commonly associated with rhythm changes and, of course, many jazz turnarounds. So, without further ado, let's get started. When we play chords in combination with a walking bass line, we have to think like a bass player within the register limitations of the guitar. So the first thing I'm going to lay down are a set of simple rules which will make your bass line sound more convincing. Number one, always play the root on the first downbeat of every chord change. If you're playing a walking bass line on guitar, it means that there is no bass player. So your role is now to hold the fourth down by playing those roots while others solo. In other words, it is your responsibility to anchor the harmony. Not doing so on at least most of the chord changes will result in harmonic chaos. That is, if you play other notes on that first downbeat, especially on a low register such as the sixth string, you will imply a different chord which may or may not work in relation to what the soloist is playing. Number two, always play the root either on the sixth or fifth string. Other than the fact that we want to use the lowest acceptable register available, this simply means that all our chords will be in root position, at least when played on the initial downbeat. Number three, use smooth voice leading at the point of chord transition. And smooth voice leading means that we want to approach the new root and chord preferably by stepwise motion. That is, a minor or major second. Try not to exceed an interval of a major third. So let's begin by looking at how these three rules are incorporated in the bass line of our first example. We are in B flat, and we are first going to learn 6 variations of the 1-6-2-5 over 2 measures. If we look at this first example, we can see 4 quarter notes per measure. Let's look initially at the application of the first rule. The downbeats, of course, are 1 and 3, and you'll notice that in the first measure, they are taken up by the root of the chords introduced, which are B flat major on the 1 and G minor on the third beat. In the second measure, we have C minor 7 on 1 and F7 on 3. So again, always play the root on the first downbeat of each chord change. Beats 2 and 4 are the upbeats within each measure, and we want to occupy them with notes which will voice lead smoothly to the upcoming chord's root. I mentioned previously that this is done preferably by stepwise motion. And so we see in the first measure that the G minor 7 in the third beat is preceded by G flat. These are also known as approach notes. We then see that the fourth beat is a D flat which approaches the C on the first beat of the second measure by a half step from above. On the second beat of this second measure, we now have a G flat approaching the F on the third beat again by a half step from above. Finally, we have C flat, which is the same as a B natural, on the fourth beat, which in turn approaches the initial B flat in measure 1 again by half step from above. So this is what is meant by smooth voice leading in the bass. The approach from the upbeat to the downbeat can be from below or above. So that's rule number 3 in action. Now, let me first just play the bass line alone so you can both see and hear rule number 2, which is always play the root either on the 6th or 5th string. And the first thing you'll notice is that I'm using my bare fingers, no pick. This gives me more flexibility in terms of combining different fingers and kind of setting this up as an equalizer where my thumb plays the bass notes while my other fingers pluck the chord on the higher register. So I'm going to play the bass line first to example 1. And it goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice that here I played a bass line that ascends up the fretboard. And I say this because in further examples, I will go down the fretboard as an alternative option. So let's proceed to add the chords. For the most part, we do this on the upbeat of 1 and 3, which is the 2nd 8th note in those beats. Leaving the initial downbeat to the bass alone creates independence between it and the chord. We want to create the illusion that there are 2 players to the extent possible. 1, 2, 3, 4. In example 2, I want to introduce some 8th notes in the bass for the approaches. And I also want to use some ghost notes. That sounds scary. To emulate a real bass. You'll notice that the ghost notes are in parentheses here. Listen to the bass line. Here's example 2, first playing the bass only. 1, 2, 3, 4. So let me show you how I do the ghost notes, or what some like to call skips, or muted notes, whatever you want to call it. Basically what I'm doing is playing the first 8th note and slightly muting the 2nd one. You can barely hear the note. What I mean by that is not in terms of volume, but in terms of identifying what note it is. Here it is with the chords. In example 3, I now introduce some 8th note triplets in the bass for the approaches. Here's example 3, first just playing the bass. 1, 2, 3, 4. So in the triplet, what I'm doing is I'm muting the middle 8th note in the triplet. Here it is with the chords. In example therefore, I am going to play a descending walking bass line on the 5th string. Here's example 4, playing only the bass. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here it is with the chords. 3, 4. Before I proceed to teach you a very cool concept, I want you to know that you can download a special study package for this lesson from my website, which includes a PDF with notation and tab for all 8 examples in this video, plus the additional 8 for minor tonalities, which I will demonstrate in part 2 of this series. Included are also 2 MP3s with all the examples and 2 band-in-a-box files for those who have the software. All of this is available for immediate download on my website, which is jazzguitar.richiezellon.com. In example 5, I want to show you a walking bass line, this time descending on the 6th string, but most important of all, I want to introduce my favorite way of playing the walking bass line to emulate an upright bass. It consists of playing a pull-off to an open string and muting it by playing the next note in the line. And this works better at faster tempos because you hardly hear the open string in it. Sometimes sounds like a ghost note, or what some like to call a skip. And notice that I always do it on the upbeat quarter notes or beats 2 and 4. I'm also combining this technique with the regular muted note concept I've been using previously. Here's example 5, playing the bass only. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now the pull-off effect, I'm going to take this low A. So if I'm going from an A to an A flat, I pull off and I stop it with the next note. Here it is with the chords. In example 6, I'm now starting the bass line on the 5th string and ascending up the fretboard. Again, I'm using the pull-offs and muted ghost notes. Here's example 6, bass only. Very similar to the previous one, to example 5, only that using a different register to start out the line. So here it is with the chords. Now I want to show you the 1-6-2-5 progression over 4 measures. So in this instance, each chord takes up a whole measure instead of half a measure. And this is actually harder because now we have to occupy the second half of each measure with either an inversion of the original chord or a dominant that resolves to the upcoming chord. In example 7, measure 1, we see a walking bass line ascending up the B-flat major scale with an enclosure on beat 4 to the new chord root in the second measure, which is G. In the second half of the second measure, we have a D flat 7, which is the substitute dominant of the upcoming C minor 7 in measure 3. Remember that all substitute dominants are tritone substitutions of the original and resolve down by half step to their target. And this is also the case for the G flat 13, which resolves to the F7 at the beginning of measure 4. And the same for the final B7 chord, which resolves by half step back down to the initial B flat chord. Here's example 7, playing the bass only. 2, 3, 4. Here it is with the chords. For example A, I'm going to use all the resources I employed in the previous example, only that I am going to play a descending line on the 6th string, and I'm going to show you something different for the last measure. So let's examine this 4th measure. Here the main chord is F7, which is the dominant of B flat. Notice that the bass starts out on the low F and ascends up the scale in stepwise motion all the way to the 3rd of the scale, which is A. The interesting variation is that between the 2 and the 3 of the scale, we now have a chromatic passing tone. And this is usually harmonized with what is known as an auxiliary diminished chord. So all in all, we have 2 passing chords between the F7 on the 1st beat and the F with A in the bass on the 4th beat. Example 8, playing the bass only. And here it is with the chords. Now this last portion is typically used in a lot of walking bass blues. So that covers our first part of walking bass lines that swing. Be on the lookout for a second part covering minor progressions in the not too distant future. As usual, I really appreciate your comments and welcome your questions. Please let me know if this was helpful, as I need your ongoing feedback to plan future lessons. If you enjoyed this lesson and haven't subscribed yet, please take a second also to do so, and don't forget to click on that bell notification icon so you will be notified of my upcoming lessons. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, peace be with you. Hasta la vista.